Hi, my name's Rachel. Welcome to Mitcham Hills Church this week. So this week Cullen is going to be continuing with the fourth part of our series, What Do You Do? And he's going to be looking at the story of Daniel from the Old Testament. I'll hand over to Cullen.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start with a question. I want you to think about someone that you deeply admire, someone you deeply respect, not someone who's you've watched on TV or you kind of think they're a bit talented at something, but someone whose life you've watched closely and you deeply admire them and deeply respect them. Now, my tip is, as you think about that person, you don't need to point to them or elbow them, but as you think about that person, there's a word that might summarize a lot of what you saw in that person. And it's this word. It's the word integrity. It's the word, it's not those words. It's that one there at the bottom, but I've lost my slide master. Have I? Okay, all good, all good. Anyway, it's the word integrity. and when we think about this word integrity, and we think about those people who we've witnessed, who have lived lives full of integrity, we think of a couple of things. We think of people who don't have a private side and a public side. We think of people who have managed to, for whatever reason, when they're facing life's circumstances and challenges and the pressures that we all face, who have managed to have a level of consistency between their private life and their public life. Like they're not a different person in different spaces. Like when you run into them at the footy club, they're the same person as when you see them at church or when you see them in their workplace. And so they demonstrate integrity. They're the sort of people who aren't just front runners. They're not great when life's really good. And then when the crisis and the challenges and the pressures of life come, they're a completely different person. They're the same person. They're not the sort of people who are different people in different places. Now, I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not talking about having a perfect kind of Instagrammable life where everything, like you got really white teeth and everything's kind of really perfect. In fact, that's kind of the opposite of what we're talking about, because integrity is gritty and earthy. And when we witness it, it has a powerful impact on us and the people around us. Integrity is really important. And as Australians, we have a pretty low tolerance when people don't act with integrity, don't we? I mean, he's not a good bloke and she's not fair dinkum if they kind of have two faces, if they say one thing to this group of people and they say one thing to this group of people. I mean, Aussies we detest that. We detest that hypocrisy. And we just don't like it when we see it. But for all of us, no matter what our background is, no matter what our beliefs are, whether we'd call ourselves a Christian, whether we're just coming back to church for the first time in a long time, whether we're from different backgrounds and beliefs, there are benefits to living a life of integrity. Just really quick benefits to live a life of integrity. I just came up with these three really quickly. And these aren't in the Bible, but they kind of are. But they're just three things I cover really quickly. If you live a life of integrity, you build trust. I mean, we trust people that live lives of integrity. People who are able to be the same person in different places, whose lives kind of connect with each other. That builds trust. It simplifies your life. If you have to tell a story to this group, and you have to tell a different story to this group, it kind of gets hard to remember which group you're kind of talking to, doesn't it? Quick example on this. My name's Cullen, but when I buy a coffee, I have a pseudonym. I have a different name because my parents gave me a complex name and Marin's parents gave her a complex name as well. And so when you order a coffee and they're like, what's your name? You don't want to get stuck being like Callum and Colin and Callan. So I just say, Sam. Because Sam's a good name, right? And if the barista, they're really nice people, but if they wanted to get to know me, then I'd probably give my real name, but they just want to make a nice coffee and they want to call out my name. So it's Sam and Mel. That's who we are when we get coffees. It's Mel and it's Sam. It's tripped me up twice though. One is when Marin orders the takeaway and I've got to pick it up on the way home. And I'm like, I've got an order under Marin. They're like, no, nothing here. Cullen, no, nothing. Oh, Mel, yep, got that one. Right, excellent. And the other time it tripped me up was a little Greek takeaway joint moved up to Blackwood, to the group of shops up in Blackwood. And the first time I was there, we did the order and it was great. What's your name? Sam, great. Except he was a really nice guy and I really like Greek. So then I went back the next week. How are you, Sam? Good, how are you? And then it happens a couple of times. And then this one time, Aaliyah, my daughter, who's now 14, she was about 7 or 8 and she went in with me. And it was like a Saturday night at 6 o'clock and it's packed, there were so many people there. There was actually some people from our church there. And I walk in and the guy's like, Sammy, how are you? And my 8-year-old turns to me, is looking at me like, my dad lives a double life. It's hard, isn't it? And I was like, Daddy will explain in the car. I can't explain it here because we've got this kind of relationship going. But here's the point, right? If you're two different people in different places, it gets hard to remember who you've told what to what. The great 1990s film, Mrs. Doubtfire, where Robin Williams is a recently separated dad who's desperate to see his kids, so he dresses up as a 70-year-old woman and pretends to be their nanny. It's actually a really great film. There's this scene at the end of the film where he's kind of double booked and he's got a family dinner where he's Mrs. Doubtfire, where he's kind of this older lady, and then he's having drinks with his boss in the same restaurant and he's got to try and be in both places and he's running between both places and he can kind of do it for a while. Like Robin Williams is a bit of a genius, he can kind of do it for a while. But eventually he rocks up and he's having a drink with his boss and he's got ladies' makeup all over him because the whole thing, and it just kind of disintegrates from there. Why? Because if you and I want to be different people in different places, it's going to kind of backfire at some point. And then the third point, inner peace. We sleep better. We sleep better, we have better consciences when we have alignment in our life, when we're able to act in alignment with the values and the beliefs that we hold. Now, the thing about living a life of integrity is, how do we do it? How do we live these lives of integrity? How do we become people where we have alignment? Now, interestingly, the word integrity shares its kind of Latin root word with the word integrated. Integrated. And you know this to be true. When you witness someone who lives a life of integrity, they don't have these different sections of their life that don't talk to each other. There is an integration of their life. There is a connection between the key parts of their life, between their beliefs, between what they say and what they do, between the person that you experience at home, the person you experience in the workplace, the person you might experience at church, the person you experience at the sports club. There is integration. And we might say things like, that person has got it all together. And what do we mean by that? We mean that their life is not this kind of fragmented, divided kind of bits and pieces here and there, that they've actually found a way for their life to be integrated, to be together. Now, the world doesn't make it easy to be integrated. The world does not make it easy to be integrated. And we think about the distractions that we have through technology. We think about the division that occurs in the world around us that puts pressure on us and leads to a fragmented life. A lot of people are talking at the moment about fragmentation, that people don't know how to talk to each other. Well, that's not just out there, that's in here. We have pressure on us that forces us to be divided internally. Modernity has given us individualism, which in many ways is a great thing, but this hyper-individualism where I can do what I want, when I want, and I can be whoever I want in the different parts of my life has led to a fragmentation that occurs within us. And you've all heard this phrase about our private lives, which is, you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. So in other words, you can be this person over here, and then you can be over here doing whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. But you and I know that eventually the thing that's private, the thing that wasn't hurting anyone, ends up hurting us and ends up hurting the people around us. Why? Because life is integrated. Things speak to each other and they're connected. So the world makes it hard for us to be integrated people. And when we feel that division and fragmentation, we say things like, I feel all over the place. And we're sort of saying, like, I feel like the bits of my life are kind of spread out all over the place. Or I'm falling apart. Life isn't coherent. Life isn't connected. Life isn't integrated. Now, over the past 3 weeks, we've been in this What Do You Do series. And we've been looking at different parts of our life. And we've been asking ourselves the question, what has faith got to do with the thing that we do? Whether it's full-time work, part-time work, whether it's being a student, whether it's being at university, at school, whether it's being retired and all the different forms of what that looks like. We're asking ourselves the question, what does it look like to live a truly integrated life? What does it look like for your faith, the things we talk about here on a Sunday, what does it look like for that to impact what you do during the week, what you do with your time? And in the first week, I talked about the fact that what we do matters. Graham last week talked about that rest is a really critical component of what our lives should look like. And Rachel talked about connection. She used the vine and the branches, what Jesus talked about that we read about in the book of John, and that we need to remain connected. Well, this morning, I want to ask this question. If integration leads to integrity, if it takes a life of integration to become a person of integrity, how do we hold it all together? How do we connect up the parts of our lives to be in a coherent alignment with each other? If our integrity is at stake as people, how do we hold it all together? And I want to look at a story, and Rachel mentioned that we'd be looking at this earlier, about a guy called Daniel. Now, we've got to kind of go back about 2,500 years, and the Babylonians have taken over Jerusalem, and they've taken captive the whole city, but they've especially taken captive a couple of teenagers, some of the smartest teenagers from Jerusalem, from the tribe of Judah, and they've taken them 1,000 kilometres back over to Babylon. And the reason they've done that is to you take the enemy's best weapons and you kind of neutralise them. That's part of it. But what you also do is they wanted to take some young people and they wanted to reprogram them, retrain them so they'd be able to help run the Babylonian Empire. And so they get over to Babylon, and some of these young Jewish boys are reprogrammed, retrained. They've got to have new names, they've got to have new uniforms, they're going to be taught new languages, and they're going to be completely changed from the people that they were, with all the connections and the structures and the culture that they had. They've been taken away from their families, they're going to be retrained into Babylonian kind of bureaucrats, I suppose is what you'd think about. They're going to help run the government in Babylon. Now, in this moment, when this happens, Daniel, one of the young men, the sort of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, there's a group of them, he makes a really important decision. Now, the tide of what's going on, he's being pulled into this new culture, he's being separated off from who he is, his familial structures, all the different parts of who he is. But in this moment of being pulled in this new direction, he makes a really important decision. And the decision is this. He decides to remain connected to who he is. Now, he can't change all the things that are going on. He doesn't want to be in this place. He wants to be back home with his family. He can't change the place that he's in. But he makes a really important decision to push back against one key thing. And this is what he does. It says this in Daniel chapter 1, if you want to look it up later. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. So Daniel says, you can change my name, you can change my uniform, I'm going to learn your languages and I'm going to work for you even though I don't want to. But in this one key area, the food that I'm going to have, I want to remain connected to who I am and the God that I serve. Now, no one really cares that much, and no one's really watching that much at this point. But Daniel knows that there are going to be challenges that are going to come. There's going to be intense focus and there's going to be intense pressure, and he wants to be the person that he's called to be. And so in this one key area, he decides to push back and to remain connected. In the lives that we have outside of this place, we often, if you're a Christian or you kind of follow the broad understanding of who God is, you can feel like you're the minority in the workplaces that you're in. You can feel like the tide of where you are swims in the opposite direction sometimes to what you believe and what you know is true. And sometimes when you're in that place, you can think, I've got to kind of solve all these things. I've got to really change all these parts. But the example of Daniel here is he didn't try and solve everything. He just ensured that he personally remained connected to who he was and who God was in this important moment. And every time he ate food, he remembered who he was. Now for me, and this might seem like a really trivial example, but I just want to kind of give a practical example. In my work, I have to travel a fair bit. And when you travel with work, and for those of you that do, it's really easy to be just like completely consumed with work, because all the normal structures that you have that kind of bookend your day and get your mind off work kind of go, because you're just in the one place and you're working for an extended period of time. And so you can end up working like almost all the time. And I made a decision a couple of years ago, and it seems like a really small thing, but I made a decision that no matter where I was and no matter what was going on, whenever I ate a meal, I would say grace. Now, I didn't get up at big work dinners and be like, right, I'm going to bless the food, everyone. I just stopped for like 10 seconds and say grace, because at home we say grace with our food. But it's one very simple way of pushing back against the tide that sweeps us in a different direction and saying, I am refusing to become fragmented. I'm refusing to become divided. I'm going to connect myself in this moment with who I am and who I believe God to be. And you might have something in your world that you might want to think about in that space. So Daniel makes this very early decision as a teenager. And what we read about, we don't have time to go through it. I'd love to, and we should do a series on this at some point because it's an incredible book. But in Daniel, there's all sorts of incredible things that happen, and he kind of rises up through the ranks over the next few years in Babylon. And then we get to this point towards the end of Daniel's life. He's like an older guy. That they think he was probably around 70 at this point. And there's a new king called King Darius. And Darius appoints 3 people to run all of Babylon. And one of them's Daniel. And these 3 people are running all of Babylon. And then Darius is so impressed with Daniel that he wants to appoint him almost like his prime minister, his lead minister, only reporting to the king. But of course, the other ones that were not promoted in this way aren't very happy. So they try and work out a way to bring Daniel down. And this is where it turns to. We're in Daniel chapter 6. It says this. It says, the administrators and the satraps, they're sort of people that administer things, tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. But they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. They scoured his life. They were trying to find a dirt file on him, and they couldn't find anything. Why? Because he was a person of integrity. because he was a person, he was a holistic person. He was a person that had integration within him. There wasn't sort of a private Daniel and a public Daniel, and if they could just get the gossip about his private life, they'd be able to bring him down. They couldn't bring him down. So they had to try and find a way to bring Daniel down, and they knew what his weak spot was, if you like. So they went here. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." See, Daniel he wasn't corrupt. He wasn't negligent. But what was at the center of Daniel's life was God, was his relationship with God. Now, at the football yesterday, and I know, Heath, I don't want to bring up the football yesterday and what happened in the score between the Crows and Melbourne. But for those of you that aren't football followers, there are really two key players on Melbourne's team. There's their big ruckman, Max Gawn, who's a great player, and there's Cozzy Pickett, who's an absolute genius, right? Now, if the Crows were to defeat Melbourne, which they did, if the Crows were to win, they had to somehow attack these two players. They had to somehow get the better, or at least neutralise these two players. Why? Because these players they're in the centre of the field. And so, you've got your backs and you've got your forwards, and you want to really attack the centre because that's the way to bring the whole team down. Unfortunately, that happened yesterday, and it did happen yesterday for the Crows. Now, the reason I bring that up is what is in the centre of our lives matters. What's in the centre holds everything together. And these administrators knew that for Daniel, at the very centre of his life was God. The very centre of his life was God, and they knew that was the way to attack him. I used to play cricket, and I was playing one particular game. We were playing down at Victor Harbour, and it was like a club match, and we were playing, and there was a bit of a crowd, and we were getting really beaten quite badly this particular day. But it was one of these long, hot summer's day, and a lot of the spectators, there was a lot of booze coming out of the bar, so as the day went on, the kind of abuse from the crowd kind of kept like getting better or worse and kind of better. And I was copping a fair bit this particular day. I heard from the crowd, you can't bat, you can't bowl, you're useless. And I was like, that sounds like my mum. But anyway, she would never say that out loud. And anyway, this particular day, I was standing in the slips, which is kind of behind the batters, and we couldn't get these people out. And then eventually, there was a nick straight to me at first slip, really simple catch, and I just dropped it, just straight dropped it. I know you're surprised. I was surprised, and it was like that moment where everyone just went, "Oh." And this crowd, this group on the hill who had been giving me all sorts for most of the day, one of the guys yelled out, everyone was quiet, and yelled out, "Hey Bailey, you would have caught it if it was a Bible." You don't know whether to laugh or like be like, "Ooh." And what you did is exactly what everyone else did. They were like, "Ooh." And my teammates were like, "Oh, like, can you say that?" And I was like, well, I couldn't do anything. I was just like, I know it would have been easier to catch if it was a Bible than a cricket ball, but it's like, what do you say? But I thought afterwards, if people think that the way to get to me is because I've got faith and because I'm a Christian, that's a good thing. That's a good thing because they know something that is true about my life, hopefully, that God is at the centre. God is at the centre. And Jesus says, and what I'm not saying that what happened down at the Victor Harbour Oval is persecution by any stretch, but he says, if you're insulted, if people act bad towards you because of me, because of Jesus, you're blessed. That's what he says. What's at the centre of your life? For Daniel, when he got under pressure in this moment, when he was under pressure from life, he was able to lean back on his centre, okay? So what happened here in the story was they have to work out a way to get Daniel. So they pass a law that makes it illegal for Daniel to pray, basically. He's not allowed to pray. And some of you have heard this story. And they quickly get the king to sign it off. And the king foolishly signs it. And then Daniel finds out. And this is where we pick up the story. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he'd done before. See, before the pressure of this particular situation had come on, Daniel had instituted a life of consistent prayer where he'd put God at the centre. And then they go to him and they find him. These men went as a group and they found Daniel praying, and I love this, and this kind of links to the song that we sang earlier, and asking God for help. You know, Daniel is the most powerful person other than the king in the whole of the empire. He's risen up in incredible ways. He's an incredibly accomplished human. And he's in his room asking God for help. Why? Because God is at the centre of his life. His life is not divided and fragmented. It's held together by something that is able to sustain the weight. The centre of our lives really matters. In George Orwell's 1984 book, the main character is a guy called Winston Smith, and he's slowly being worn down by the party. So all the parts of his life are being slowly worn down. And he's got this one part of his life that is kind of untouched by the party. And it's his love affair with a lady called Julia. And it's the one thing that kind of keeps him sane. Like his whole world is falling apart all around him and he's being kind of chipped away in many ways. But he's got this love affair with this lady called Julia. And in the story, in the book, in room 101, he gets brought to room 101 and he has a phobia for rats. And so they unleash these rats on him. And they say, if you don't betray Julia, you're going to have to keep dealing with these rats. And so he gives in to the temptation and he betrays the last part of his heart that was untouched by the party. And after that moment, when he gives up that part of who he is, he becomes an incredibly diminished and weak person. Why? Because at the centre of his life was this love affair with Julia. And so when that was lost, the whole thing fell away. Now the analogy is this. For Daniel, when he's under the pressure of life, when he's been betrayed, when he's facing death, when he's facing the worst possible circumstances, the question is, where does he go back to? He goes back to his centre, and his centre, and this is important, his centre is able to sustain the weight and the pressure of what he's facing. If my centre is not able to cope with the toughest of life's circumstances, then everything will fall away. In The Lord of the Rings, there's this incredible scene right at the end of the book, or the books, in the 3rd book, where Frodo, who is the ring bearer, has to try and get the ring, and the whole story is about getting the ring up to Mount Doom, into Mordor, and get rid of this ring. And so the story is really about his ability, it seems to be about his ability to carry the burden of the ring and get it into Mount Doom. And Frodo gets to the bottom of the last hill into Mount Doom after a long time, 3 very long movies worth of time. And at the bottom of Mount Doom, his friend, Samwise Gamgee, picks him up, puts him on his back, and carries him up to the top of Mount Doom. Which to the reader, when you read it fresh, is a shock, because the whole thing has been about this quest, this personal, individual quest of Frodo. Will he be resilient enough in the great moment to put the ring into Mount Doom? That's what the story is positioned as. Only for Tolkien, quite artfully, at the last moment, to show that actually the quest was all about the friendship between Sam and Frodo, and the fact that Sam was able to put Frodo on his back, carry him up to the top in his hour of need. That was the actual point of the whole thing. And friends, for us, as Heath shared earlier, the quest of your life and the quest of my life is not about our ability to remain resilient and to do all the things we need to do to hold all the things together. At the very centre of the invitation of Jesus is this ask of, can I be your centre? Whatever you and I decide to make the centre of our lives will be the question of how we can hold everything together and what will ultimately sustain, what will ultimately hold. For Daniel, when he's under the pressure, he's facing death, he's facing betrayal, he's facing the lions, his center was his God. Now, King Darius, back to the story, King Darius realizes that he's made a terrible mistake and he's got to basically send Daniel to the lion's den. And he spends about 24 hours trying to work out how it cannot happen, how he cannot follow through with his own law, but eventually he realizes he has to. And so Daniel gets put into the lion's den with all these lions. And as he's being put in, this is what King Darius says. The king says to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." May your God, who you serve continually. Darius had watched Daniel's life closely for an extended period of time. He was trying to work out who this person was and whether he should promote him. And because he watched his life, he saw integrity and he saw this. He saw consistently serving and following God. He saw that up close. Whom you serve continually. Now, friends, for many of us, we have family and friends and people, co-workers and people in our life who we would love to know about who God is and what he's done in our lives. We would love to share that with them. And if you're anything like me, you think about, what are the things I could say in the right moment, or what's the right invitation to give someone to invite them to learn more about a life of faith. And all those things are really good things, by the way, and we constantly talk about that. To me, is really significant here. In that the thing that was the ultimate beacon to the people around him was his consistent life of integrity and serving God. We can't change people's hearts. We can't kind of force people to do anything. We can't coerce people. It's not part of who we are. But we can make decisions to live integrated, connected lives that consistently show how much we love God, that God's at the center and that we're continually serving him. Now, Daniel went into the lion's den for 24 hours. And the next morning, the king rushed back to see what had happened. And he said this to Daniel. He said, when he came near the den, the king, he called Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually," that phrase again, "whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel spoke back, because his God was able to save him from the lions. His God was able to not only save him from the lions, but was able to be the center that could absorb all the pressure and the challenge and the circumstances that he faced, and was able to help him live a life of integrity. He made decisions as a young person to live a holistic life and be connected and not be kind of disparate and divided, right to the end of his life when he made decisions to follow God and make God the center. Let's pray. Well, Heavenly Father, this is all a lot easier to talk about and harder to do, because life's hard. And we get challenged with stuff all the time, and we get challenged with circumstances, and things come in from left field that we don't always know how to handle, and we find ourselves in positions where we feel divided and fragmented. And we just thank you for this example of Daniel. We thank you for the opportunities that we have, not to fix everything and change everything, but to make deliberate decisions to live integrated lives. And we just ask that you would just show us what it looks like for you to be our center. For us not to try and hold everything in our own strength or try and kind of pull everything together because we're able to do it, but to know that you can carry us, you can be our center. And that we can live truly integrated lives, not because we're organized or because we've got it all together, but because you've got it all together and you've got us in the palm of your hand. And so I ask right now by your Spirit that you would challenge us in all areas of our life, in areas that we've previously kind of kept apart from you or kept segregated from you, that we would open ourselves up and ask, what does it look like to live in a truly connected and integrated way? We just thank you for the example of Jesus, the person of ultimate integrity. And we ask that his vision for life and his model would be our model. And so we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Cullen, for sharing that message, and a reminder about when we have God at the centre of our lives, how it can change everything. And we look forward to next week when Craig's going to be concluding our series, and we hope you all have a fabulous week, and blessings over all of you.